Hello, and welcome to Inventors Helping Inventors. I'm your host, Alan Beckley, inventor of the Wonder Wallet. If you're an inventor searching for proven ways to make money with your invention, if you dream to see your product selling in stores everywhere, you've come to the right place. There's no better place to get help than from experts, inventors who've already achieved success. Every week, I interview successful inventors, asking them the questions you want to know. Tune in to learn from the experts so you can get your invention out of the tank and into the bank.
Almost anything that is manufactured will either have gluten added either as a preservative, a color, or a filler, or there's the potential for cross-contamination. Even if the food is naturally gluten-free and has no gluten ingredients, it was probably manufactured on a line with gluten, and therefore it could have gluten contamination. And I am so sensitive that I react to trace amounts of gluten in less than 180 seconds. So I had to relearn how to live my life in a world that was basically trying to poison me.
What's the most difficult part of inventing? It's not the creative process of inventing a new product. It's not even navigating the patent process. The most difficult part is marketing your product so you can make money from it. If you're like most inventors, you love inventing and creating, but you hate marketing. Maybe you'd prefer to turn the marketing of your product over to an agency that claims to have helped hundreds of inventors. Unfortunately, that's expensive and always ends badly. Here's the good news. Marketing is a learnable skill, and I can teach you, empower you to market your own invention through a proven, effective process. Sound intriguing? If you're a serious inventor who's ready to learn how to license your invention to get it to market sooner rather than later, my product-to-market training could be right for you. Through 7 hours of one-on-one, in-depth training, I will show you how to create a clear, concise, compelling marketing message for your product. I'll show you how to use a new AI agent to find 30 or more companies in just minutes that could be great partners to license your product. Then we'll use another AI agent that looks at your top 10 companies and then finds names, titles, email addresses, and LinkedIn profiles of up to 100 contacts. Armed with all this, I'll work with you to design a step-by-step process for you to use to reach out to companies and contacts with your clear, compelling message. Then you're ready to begin contacting the companies yourself. I'm planning to work with no more than 2 inventors through the product-to-market training. If this sounds like something you'd like to explore, to finally get your product off the sidelines and into the market, let's talk and see if this program is a fit for you. Just email me at alan@alanbeckley.com and put in the subject line, Product to Market. I'll reach out to you and schedule a time for us to talk. Again, just email me at alan@alanbeckley.com. Put Product to Market in the subject line. I look forward to talking to you. Welcome to episode number 634. Today, I interview Carolyn Haeler. Carolyn Haeler grew up in South Salem, New York. She attended Colby College in Maine, focused on economic statistics and studio art. Later, she earned an MBA at Yale School of Management, focused on finance. She had a lucrative career ahead of her with J.P. Morgan in New York. In 2012, an event happened which changed the course of her life and ultimately her career as well. She was diagnosed with celiac disease, forcing her to change her diet to gluten-free products. As a busy stockbroker, often eating on the run, she would buy gluten-free cookies and snacks, only to discover most of them tasted terrible. Why hasn't someone created gluten-free snacks that are tasty, she wondered. She spent years seeking out better gluten-free products and never found any. So she made a big career change. She gave up her lucrative job at JP Morgan and became an inventor seeking to finally create tasty gluten-free snacks. After much trial and error, striving to bake better tasting gluten-free snacks, she launched the award-winning Mightylicious gluten-free cookie company. Following on the heels of that success, she has introduced free, all-new gluten-free flour blends so that gluten-free bakers can bake like a pro. The innovative varieties include all-purpose gluten-free, vegan gluten-free all-purpose, and vegan gluten-free brownie mix. Today, Mightylicious gluten-free snacks and flours are available in 43 states in major retailers, including Whole Foods, Giant, and H-E-B, and also via her website, Mightylicious.com. You'll want to listen to this entire episode where Carolyn shares how she discovered that most gluten-free snacks used flours that were poorly suited for baking and contained bitter-tasting ingredients like sorghum. Also, how she endured months of frustration as she tested with many formulations, most of which tasted no better than the competition, before she found the perfect combination for Mightylicious. And finally, how she recommends to inventors not to focus on what they don't want, but instead to focus on figuring out who they are and what they truly care about as keys to fulfillment. Now let's get right to our interview with Carolyn Haeler. Carolyn Haeler, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast with us today.
Thank you so much, Alan. I'm really excited to be here.
Carolyn, can you share a bit of your background with our listeners? For example, where did you grow up and go to school? And what did you do before you became an inventor?
Yeah, I am from a little town called South Salem, which is in northern Westchester, New York. So I'm from the country, but my parents commuted into the city every single day, into the city, meaning New York City. I went to college. I went to Colby College, which is up in Maine, and I studied economics, statistics, and studio art up there. And then I became a public sector consultant for 4 years down in DC post-graduation. I helped the Department of Defense optimize their supply chain for the C-5 cargo plane. I decided that was interesting, but not what I wanted to do with my life. So I went to business school at the Yale School of Management, where I focused on finance, and then I became a stockbroker.
That's such a fascinating combination, and it does match something I see with some frequency with inventors, basically, is we're people who come up with ideas and we look at things in a very different way than the average person to start with. And in most cases, I don't think I've ever had an inventor on who said, I've just been a CPA for my entire life, and that's what I've done, right? Almost always, we've had different experiences. We've taken on, like you were talking about, economic consulting in the public sector, going to Colby College in Maine, and then being involved with the C-5 cargo logistics, but then recognizing maybe that's not quite right. So you got into business school and went from there. And then ultimately, as we'll talk about in a moment, you had an aha idea that took you in maybe a little different direction than you had before.
Yeah, I would say it's both my curse and blessing. I get distracted easily. My mind is always spinning. When I was a consultant, I did notice that consultants, I think, are relatively creative people. They're problem solvers, and that requires a specific amount of creativity. And there's also a lot of uncertainty in consulting because they're trying to figure out sometimes what the actual problem is. But I did notice that there would be this box everyone was within. I'd always be spinning up above and around the box in my thought process, and that made some people uncomfortable. So it is, yes, I am as passionate about data and statistics as I am about oil painting and color theory and composition.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'd like to kick off by saying, like many entrepreneurs and inventors, a personal circumstance occurred that set you on an entirely different personal and career journey than previously. Could you share with our listeners what that turning point was for you and also why it caused you to make big changes in both your life and your career? Could you share that with us?
Yeah, I would say there would be actually two pivotal turning points. The first one occurred in 2012 when I was diagnosed with celiac disease. That was a pivotal moment in my entire life because celiac disease is something that is life changing. I had eaten everything and really loved food and baking and cooking and shopping. I love grocery stores. I love traveling for like when I go to a new place, I love to go and see the museums and all the different touristy things, but I also just love to go to the grocery store and see what kind of yogurt they have. I'm very interested in food in general. And I was diagnosed with celiac disease. And at the moment that I was diagnosed, it was a real relief because my immune system had been failing for over a year and my hair was falling out. My skin had turned gray. I was getting sicker and sicker. And my doctor looked at me and said, maybe you have HIV. And that is a that is a tough thing to hear. And so that's created quite a lot of anxiety in that moment for me. And fortunately, I had a colonoscopy and endoscopy scheduled for just a few days after that appointment. And they found the antibody for celiac disease. They were like, congratulations, you have an autoimmune disease and don't eat bread or pasta. And they handed me a single piece of paper and said, this is what you can eat and what you can't eat. And I was tremendously relieved that I knew what it was and it felt like something that was well within my control. But then I had to learn how to heal my body and had to learn quickly what celiac disease truly is. And one of the things that makes a gluten intolerance or celiac disease or any type of gluten sensitivity so challenging is that gluten is in everything. When you think about gluten, you think about bread and pasta, cake and cookies, and all those things that make life worth living. But we don't think about is that it's in things like imitation crab. It's in soy sauce. It can be in apple cider vinegar. It's in a lot of sodas, Pepsi, Diet Coke, many ginger ales. Almost anything that is manufactured will either have gluten added either as a preservative, a color, or a filler, or there's the potential for cross-contamination. Even if the food is naturally gluten-free and has no gluten ingredients, it was probably manufactured on a line with gluten, and therefore it could have gluten contamination. And I am so sensitive that I react to trace amounts of gluten in less than 180 seconds. So I had to relearn how to live my life in a world that was basically trying to poison me. And so that was a huge pivotal moment in my life that I was still grappling with when I started my company. Was taken from me when I was diagnosed with celiac disease was, yes, the cake and the pasta and the beer and things like that, which do bring a lot of joy in your life. But the thing that really impacted me, especially as a stockbroker, getting up at 5 a.m. to get to the gym and then to work before 7:30 and the market's open and then not being able to leave my desk the entire day because of trading hours, was the convenience that gluten really offers, like bread and pasta and bagels and muffins and all of these things are things that you can just grab and throw in your purse, throw in your backpack, not have to think about it. When it's going to survive the journey, it's going to be fine at 10 a.m. It's also going to be fine at 5 p.m. And being able to facilitate your life via gluten. And that was taken away from me. And so that made my life significantly more challenging. I have to think about every meal, even today, and I work from home now to make sure that I'm not going to poison myself. I have to think about when I travel, where am I going to stay? I no longer really stay at hotels. So I have to stay at Airbnbs because I really feel more safe and confident if I have a kitchen and a refrigerator where I can bring and prepare my own food. So that was what I was dealing with when about 5 years into my career in finance. And I just was in my mid-30s and didn't like my job anymore, was waking up in the morning and really dreading waking up in the morning and dreading the commute and realizing for the first time in my life, the thing that was different about this moment was that I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I usually am a very focused, very passionate, very driven person. And I just had this ambivalence towards life that I never encountered and didn't know how to cope with. And I was feeling this way, had this ambivalence and this antipathy.
Carolyn, you hit on several points that I found to be fascinating, and I think our listeners did as well about your story. And the first one that caught me by surprise is when you said it was a relief when you found out you had celiac disease. And I thought, you've got an autoimmune disease and it's a relief. But then you contrasted with that with saying they thought in the beginning that you might have HIV. And you said, why? Choice between the one and the other, I'd much rather have the celiac disease, right? But also, you were just talking about several different things that I didn't realize, and maybe our listeners don't realize, but that the challenge with gluten items, many challenges, is it could be what you might have described as gluten adjacent, meaning the item itself doesn't contain gluten, but somewhere on the production line, there might be something that has gluten that could cross-contaminate it anyways. And I thought that was fascinating as well. And then you were just talking about the fact that you had this incredibly busy life as a stockbroker, having to get up early in the morning, get to work, and that gluten types of items like muffins and everything else, they tend to keep well and all the rest of that. So they have a high convenience. But if you're gluten intolerant, then that's not going to work well for you. So I think you hit on several key things, as well as mentioning that from the word go, you've always been a foodie. And I think we could then transition into the next part, which I think is a logical rejoinder, and that is what happened next. What was your aha moment? I think it was in about 2017, maybe, that caused you to invent improved gluten-free cookies and flours. And what was the key problem or problems you were working to solve in doing so? Could you share that with our listeners?
Yeah. So over the course of there's 5 years between when I was diagnosed and when I started the company. And over those 5 years, there's more and more brands on the market that were being marketed and labeled as gluten-free. And because I'm the captive audience, I have celiac disease, I have no choice in the matter. I would buy these new brands and I'd be so excited about it. And they just were underwhelming, Alan. They didn't taste the way that I wanted them to taste. They didn't taste the way that I remembered. They didn't taste, frankly, in many instances, the way that they should. And I often would buy gluten-free products, spend a lot of money on them because they are more expensive than the average retail, and then not even eat them. I would often throw them away. And it was Christmas time, and I'd been shopping all day, and I'd forgotten to have breakfast and lunch and realized how hungry I was. And I was standing online and I was stressed out for my career and for my job and not wanting to be in line. And there was a package of gluten-free cookies in front of me. And so I grabbed them and there is a beautiful packaging. It said artisanal on it. And there's this wonderful pictures and had this story about this chef. And I opened them up. And before I even purchased them, I took a bite of the cookie and I couldn't even swallow it. It wasn't even what I would consider to be edible. And I like to eat. There's very few foods, if you put it in front of me, I won't eat. And so I was like, oh man, now I have to buy these cookies. And then I threw them away before I even left the store. And that was the moment. I was like, you know what? Someone has to do better than this. Someone can do better than this. And I love to bake. And I don't like my job. And I went to business school. I know how to start a business. And I do want to qualify that business school really opened up my eyes because I was fortunate enough to go to the business school where Barry Nailbuff is a professor, and he's one of the founders of Honest Tea. And meeting someone who has started a business, and Barry in his own right is an incredibly accomplished and impressive person. But when you meet someone and you have them as a professor, you also realize that they are just a person. They're just like you and me. And I got to hear the story firsthand of Seth and Barry starting Honest Tea and Barry's kitchen. And I realized that anyone can do this.
Quick highlight. I think that's once again a very interesting story, the arc of what drove you to create this product, recognizing that I like that you made a clear point that you had to have gluten-free products. It wasn't an option. So you had to buy gluten-free. And if they tasted terrible and weren't very good, now what do you do? Right. And I suspect at some point there was this light bulb or aha moment saying, wait a minute, I've bought quite a few of these and they're not cheap and they don't taste very good. I wonder if millions of other people had the same experience. And I wonder if there's a way to create something that's gluten-free that actually tastes good. So I suspect maybe that was the jumping point off for the next part. So kind of rolls my next question, but what would you say was your biggest challenge that you faced as you finally made that turn and began creating your tasty, Mightylicious gluten-free cookies? Also, I'm just going to ask, because it's true of every inventor, how did you overcome being discouraged when you were trying many formulations without much luck? So can you tell us kind of the formulation story? What did you do next once you realized gluten-free was not very tasty and that you felt like now you had a mission to see if you could start a business and actually create gluten-free that was tasty?
Yeah, so within the gluten-free market, it was not only that they weren't good, but everything was very similar, right? So there was a lack of sort of innovation within the industry, which I understand better now. I am both an artist and am very data driven. And in art, one of the most terrifying moments is facing the blank page, whether you're a writer or a painter or a sculptor, is just having nothing and then having to figure out what to fill that page with and to invent it from nothing. So it's a fear and that I've have some experience dealing with. And I knew based on the 5 years of eating terrible gluten-free products that I basically had to start from scratch, that there wasn't going to be an answer there for me. I did start by researching, which is what I've been trained to do. I researched all the recipes I could find, put them into a spreadsheet. So it was very organized and analytical, and started creating cookies. And I spent weeks, if not months, creating terrible, horrific gluten-free cookies that no one ate, that I threw away, that were terrible. And I started to hone in on the fact that I'd been baking cookies my whole life. And I was like, a cookie is just butter, sugar, flour, some vanilla, and a little bit of leavening. Why is this not working gluten-free? And then it was the gluten-free flour blend. And so I'd been purchasing ready-to-use gluten-free flour blend from the major manufacturers, and there aren't too many of them, and realized I was like, okay, so these flour blends are not working. This is not going to cut it. I'm going to have to come up with my own flour blend. So then I really went to blogs. Blogging at the time, Instagram didn't exist yet. And so blogs and bloggers were where there's a lot of informal information. And so I started really researching what people were doing in the blog sphere and finding some recipes and understanding flour blends and how these different creators were coming up with their own flour blends. I started experimenting, creating a flour blend, and realizing that not only was the flour blend important, but the ingredients that go into the flour blend and the way that they're milled are super important. Rice flour in the US is not milled. It's the basis of most gluten-free baking, or if not all gluten-free baking. And it's not milled for baking, it's milled for cooking. So it's milled to a fine sand. It's not milled to a super fine consistency like cornstarch is. And it needs to be that super fine consistency. So I had to find manufacturers who could and would do that for me. But then I also realized that one of the primary ingredients they put into gluten-free flour is an ancient grain called sorghum, is the most common one. And sorghum flour is high in protein, so it replaces the protein you lose when you take the wheat out of the formula. But it doesn't taste good. It tastes bitter and acrid and has a bad aftertaste. It even interacts with your taste buds in a way that is painful if you eat a lot of it. I knew I had to remove that ingredient, but most manufacturers use that ingredient. So I came up with this flour blend and spent weeks to a month just practicing and developing my flour blend until I had a flour blend that was basically as perfect as I could get it, that performed in most applications similar, as close to wheat flour as was possible. And then I started crafting my cookie recipes. And from that moment forward, making cookie recipes was joyful. It was not easy. Baking and coming up with recipes is certainly not an easy task, but it was something that I was able to make progress on. And my first cookie I ever created was my brown butter chocolate chip. And it's to date probably still my favorite cookie and the best cookie I've ever created. And at that moment that I created this recipe, it was the best cookie I'd ever baked, whether gluten-free or not gluten-free. And that was what I was after. I was after a product that was as good, if not better, than what you remembered as a child, like baking cookies with your grandmother. And so it was really me figuring out what the problem within the industry was. And that problem had to do not only with the ingredients themselves, but then also how those ingredients were manufactured, figuring out a way to overcome that and then moving forward.
I want to mention, because you've covered a lot of things that I wanted to kind of break down for our listeners, very valuable information in the sense that as I was listening to you describe step by step your story of setting out to create good tasting gluten-free cookies, flours, and products, that you spent months, as we described, feeling terrible and frustrated because you were setting out and creating your own gluten products. But once again, they weren't particularly good most of the time either. And what you did, and I think your data background served you really well, your analytical background here is, I would say, from my engineering perspective, you were asking what is the root cause of why gluten-free products taste so terrible? And I think you highlighted that you found two. The first one was the flour. The flours that was being used was, first of all, not tasty, and more, even worse, the consistency, like sorghum presented other problems. Sorghum wasn't very tasty, et cetera. And also some of the flours were not really optimal for baking, cooking okay, but not good for baking. So that was one root cause where I heard you describe it. And then the other one was more specifically the ingredients that you found that were being used. And I just referenced sorghum and some others. So once you realized the flour was the problem, and secondarily that some of the ingredients needed to be replaced or changed out, then you began to progress forward pretty quickly from the way you describe it, because now you had something to move forward with to truly create a gluten-free set of tasty products that weren't there before. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely.
I'd also like to ask, as we move forward and what the future looks like, could you share with our listeners where your cookies are being sold now? And also, what is the future for Mightylicious cookies, and I think flours as well? And what is next for you? What does the next, say, 6 months to a year look like for you?
Yeah, so we're sold in over 43 states. So I started this company in my studio apartment in New York City, and I had walked into a Whole Foods and that sort of looking for feedback, and they liked it so much that they launched me in 3 stores, and that started everything in 2017. I'm now in 43 states. I'm in national stores like Giant and HEB. I'm also in thousands of independent sort of regional stores all over the nation. So you could probably find me in your local grocery store. If you can't, you can certainly ask them about me. That really works to help me get on shelf. I'm also on Amazon, and we have a direct-to-consumer website, Mightylicious.com, where you can order everything and anything and everything. We did launch our flour blends, as you mentioned. I started with gluten-free cookies. We now have gluten-free and vegan cookies, as well as 3 flour blends. We have our gluten-free flour blend, our vegan flour blend, and then our gluten-free and vegan brownie mix, which we launched last year because the problem, as we stated earlier, for so many people who are gluten-free or gluten intolerant, is that the flour doesn't work. Most recipes start with some sort of flour blend. If your flour blend is not great, then your end product is also not going to be great. So to meet that demand and that problem in the market, we launched our flour blend last year, and it's doing phenomenally well. Our brownie mix is actually my best-selling SKU ever. But yeah, you can get us on Amazon, Mightylicious.com. And if we're not in your local grocery store, please ask about us.
It's a fantastic success story, and it's very uplifting and exciting to hear, especially now being in 43 states. And I've heard this story told a few times that Whole Foods stores is often much more open to creative, innovative products being brought in than many other grocery stores tend to be. And that's exciting that you got your initial start in 3 Whole Foods markets, right? And that got you started, and they've been really helpful partners since. And that as time goes on, you're getting into more and more stores. And also, you mentioned HEB. If you live in Texas, you know what HEB is. It's
I
quite a
do.
large grocery store here, all over Texas, but not in so many other states. But they're a good store. So that's on Giant and many others. But yeah, so that's exciting because the inventor and the entrepreneur's journey is one that's always challenging and often frustrating. So to have taken something that started as a vision and really turning into a product and having the market embrace it and having them point you to doing vegan and other kinds of things is really pretty exciting. So as we roll towards a close, I'd like to ask, are there any parting words you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I'd say that one of the things I think that as I'm now in my 40s is the thing that I know now and I wish I'd known when I was younger is focus on figuring out who you are and what you care about, because that's going to be the thing that for me personally is going to bring you the most joy. I think there's a lot of certainly noise out there and distractions that sort of inform people about who they should be or what they should want to do. And figuring out who you are and the things that really bring you joy and satisfaction and understanding that and will give you a lot of guidance into sort of what you should be doing with your life and what's going to bring you the most enjoyment and happiness and fulfillment.
Nobody in 600 plus episodes has ever said that. So that's really a cool one. And that is figure out who you are and what you care about. And that's not always an easy journey. It's much easier to figure out what we don't like and maybe who we aren't. Okay, I've been a stockbroker, but that's not what I want to do the rest of my life. But it's like, who am I then? So that is an aha moment for many people when they essentially find their mission in life, figure out who they are and what they care about, and then try to shape their life accordingly going forward from that. Thanks for sharing that with us. And then lastly, I'd like to ask, how can our listeners reach you if they have other questions or would like to purchase from you?
Yeah, so certainly go visit us at our website, Mightylicious.com. There's a lot of information on the website about our products, about me, about our mission, about our ingredients. If you'd like to reach us directly, the email is just info@Mightylicious.com. That actually does come directly to me and to the rest of my team as well.
A quick question I'd like, since this is a podcast and people aren't seeing things in writing, could you spell out Mightylicious for them so they know how to do Mightylicious.com and find it properly?
Absolutely. It's just Mighty, Mighty, and then Licious, LICIOUS.com.
And then, of course, they can email you at info@Mightylicious.com.
Yes.
Carolyn, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing your story, your journey, really what you went through from life experiences and how that shaped you and moved you in the direction of creating something that the marketplace really does need and just wasn't there. So truly delicious gluten-free products. And I know there's going to be more coming in the future from you. So I'd like to reserve the opportunity, maybe in another 6 months or at most a year, to follow up with you again and see what you've got going on at that time.
I'd love that, Alan. That sounds wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for tuning in to Inventors Helping Inventors. If you like the show, please tell your friends about it. Make sure to subscribe in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss a single episode. Talk to you soon.